A lot has transpired between the last Pinpoint episode and this one. The second wave of COVID-19 hitting us, healthcare collapsing, people dying, newfound international friends stabbing us in the back, and so on. I was recently chatting with a friend and we were discussing why the second COVID wave hit us so badly and what the government could have done better to contain the damage caused. I was of the opinion that there's nothing significantly different that the government could have done because the Indian state is a victim of its own rhetoric and suffers from democratic schizophrenia and paralysis. I'll explain all that in a moment, but my friend thought I was being unreasonable and unfair. Meanwhile, there were elections in some states, but West Bengal made the most headlines on account of the brutal violence that followed the declaration of results. The target of the violence were, no prizes for guessing, Hindus in general and BJP workers in particular. I don't even want to get into the why and how of it all, because one, it has already been discussed to death on social media, and two, there is nothing worth analyzing in what is simply a case of betrayal of the ordinary Hindu by celebrity politicians. Earlier this year, in February, I think, my friend Ajay tweeted as follows, and I quote, "Gullible Hindus won't understand it now, but confused BJP and RSS are paving the road for a communist takeover of India." After that, he wrote a short thread on why he thought so and explained how the scenario was plausible, if not probable. Now, I am not given to speculating much about the future, but I must say that his reasoning made a lot of sense. Ajay invoked the decoy effect of behavioral economics and applied it to India's electoral politics to make the claim that the current government is paving the way for a communist rule in India. Obviously, it may sound very preposterous to a lot of people. So, what I'll do today is to first explain what Ajay was getting at and then take a different approach to arrive at a similar, if not the same, conclusion. But as promised, first the decoy effect. We know how the human mind works, or maybe we don't. Dan Ariely, in his popular book on behavioral economics titled Predictably Irrational, shows that the human mind can only make sense of relationships and not facts by themselves. That means that confronted with a set of choices, the mind draws a relationship between the choices and makes a decision that may not be rational, yet makes sense to people. He illustrates this with the example of an advertisement for subscription to the famous magazine, The Economist. As you can see on the screen, the choices advertised are: number one, digital subscription only, that is for $59. Print subscription only for $125. And the third choice is print plus web subscription at $125 again. The intriguing thing here is the choice between options 2 and 3. Why would anyone choose 2 when he gets an obviously better deal in option 3 and at the same price? Ariely calls option 2 a decoy, introduced to push consumers to go for option 3, in the absence of which a lot fewer people would opt for the more expensive choice. Indeed, that's how it turned out empirically too when Ariely conducted this experiment on students at MIT's Sloan School of Management. Of the 100 students who participated in the survey, 84 opted for option 3 at $125 and 16 for option 1 at $59. Next, he removed the decoy, that is option 2. So that was completely out of the picture. the one which is the print subscription only at $125. Between the two remaining options, the trend reversed. This time, 68 students opted for the cheaper, that is digital only subscription, and 32 chose the more expensive combo. Ariely goes on to give many more examples of the decoy effect, and a piece of advice that the younger college-going viewers might find practically useful, which has to do with dating strategy. Like if you're going to a party where you want to hook up with a girl, Ariely advises that you take a decoy along, a similar looking friend, but a notch less attractive than you, or maybe less talented than you, less good at making conversations, and then see the magic. You may be thinking, what does this have to do with where India is headed? Well, Ajay argues that the current regime, with its wishy-washy approach to civilizational issues, its apathy towards the existential threats to Hindus, and a surprising degree of alignment with the left on matters like caste-based politics, minority appeasement, development, secularism, socialist economics, etc., is a perfect decoy. Think about it. Garibi Hatao becomes Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. The education minister proudly declares that the curriculum set by the Marxists continues to be taught in schools. So-called right-wingers often say that we are truly secular, while the earlier governments were pseudo-secular or secular. As the great Arun Shourie once remarked, BJP is Congress with a cow. But with the Prime Minister himself labeling people who try protecting their cows from getting abducted and slaughtered by the beef mafia as gundas, even that qualification with the cow seems unnecessary. Have a look at this picture. This is some BJP event with the Dravidian venomous ideologue E.V. Ramaswamy featured on the poster. The RSS Joint General Secretary has declared that there is much in common between Periyar's Dravidian principles and RSS ideology. Slow claps. Many influencers associated with the BJP have been found to be using this recently coined term called subaltern Hindutva. Though with their general aversion to thought, it is unlikely if the foot soldiers really know what their leadership means by it. The term subaltern was coined by Marxist philosopher Antonio Gramsci, and subaltern studies in India are part of an out-and-out leftist project that furthers the religious agenda of Islamists and Christian evangelists. Obviously, the current regime does these things because it believes that that's where the key to the power is. But unfortunately, this strategy makes them a cheap replica of the communists and gives people an impetus to shift their needle more towards the left. This does not mean that a party like CPIM will gain majority soon, but anyone who openly and more articulately professes the same policy without even self-identifying as a communist could take advantage of the situation in a few years. And all that they would need to do is to be openly far left, and the decoy effect will render the BJP redundant. Now let me try to approach the problem at a more fundamental level. Let us forget about the decoy theory and turn our attention towards the underlying philosophy of the modern Indian Republic. The preamble to the Constitution mentions the values that the Republic holds in the highest regard: justice, equality, liberty, fraternity. All these are Enlightenment era buzzwords. Add to the mix the newfound love of globalism and economism, and the myth of eternal economic growth in the post-90s liberalization era. Prima facie, there is nothing wrong with these values and the political discourse that emanates from them. They have a great psychological appeal, in fact, and this is evident from their sway over popular imagination in the West for more than 2 centuries now. The only problem is that they are impossible to achieve, and that is where all the trouble begins. Much has been written about the philosophical shortcomings and the grave consequences of liberalism, which is the ideology at the heart of modern democracies, including India. Unfortunately, these deep critiques by great European thinkers like Nietzsche or Spengler, Pauline, and Benoit have largely been ignored, as a result of which their pessimistic predictions from 100 years ago now look like prophecies. The intellectual movement that was influenced by these thinkers is called the European New Right. And in this talk, I am only applying their insights to contemporary India and exploring what inferences we can draw from that. The New Right argues that modern liberalism and Marxism espouse the same values: egalitarianism, globalism, and the other things that I mentioned earlier. So much so that their rhetorical vocabulary is identical, as both the ideologies advocate for democracy, human rights, equality, economic progress, etc., etc. Both systems of thought believe that all men are born equal, a dogma they unself-consciously borrow from the Judeo-Christian worldview. However, there is an important difference between how the two ideologies, that is, liberalism and Marxism, apply the dogma of equality to politics. Liberals, when they think of equality, think of social equality. They imagine a system where people have equality of opportunity or a level playing field where they're rewarded as per their innate talent. Basically, a meritocratic society. As we have seen in such countries, this arrangement starts with massive turbulence, where the old elites give way to the new ones, as happened, for example, in early to mid 20th century America, where affordable higher education to nearly everyone created millionaires and billionaires of ordinary university students who had come from modest financial backgrounds. This is why the United States became the fabled land of opportunities, as universal access to education translated to upward mobility of a kind never seen before in recorded history. But every dream must end, and so by the end of 20th century, higher education started becoming unaffordable, leading to student debts. The job market was no longer as thriving as before, thanks to outsourcing to other countries, and slow domestic growth followed. And as a result, the correlation between, let's say, higher education and the rise in socioeconomic status became weak and eventually almost disappeared. This is a practical demonstration of how liberalism sows the seeds of its own demise and makes way for its radical cousin, Marxism, to take hold of the people's minds. Today, the dominant ideology inside American academia is decidedly left of center. And what they call cultural Marxism is pretty mainstream now. Let me flesh this out a little more for the sake of clarity. Equality of opportunity does not lead to equality of outcome. That much is expected. But the disarming paradox is that equality of opportunity amplifies inequality of outcome, because the Christian dogma that all men are equal is utter garbage. This dogma is also the basis of the now defunct blank slate theory of the human mind. Therefore, the biological differences inherent in a population lead to more inequality when social inequities are minimized. even otherwise, purely from an economic point of view, social equality exacerbates economic inequality. This leads to a massive crisis. Growing inequality of outcome in a capitalist society reflects in the increasing gap between the rich and the poor. For example, today the richest 1% of Americans make more money than the entire bottom 50% of the population. This inequity is tolerable to the masses as long as there is hope of rising from rags to riches on the back of your hard work. When that is no longer the case, as we see in America today, it leads to populist anger and social strife. You see, the religious dogma of equality translates to legal equality, that is, equality before law. Liberalism views political and legal inequalities as man-made problems. But somehow it washes its hands of economic inequality and tolerates it without any visible sign of anxiety. Enter Marxism, which says that equality cannot stop at mere legal hocus pocus, and real equality would only be attained if wealth is distributed equally. The masses take to it like ants to sugar syrup. But why are we talking about the United States? Because it helps explain the situation in India, which is much simpler. India is a relatively poor country. In terms of per capita GDP, India figures somewhere around the 140 mark among the 190 odd countries in the world. From 1947 to the early 90s, we were living in a quasi-communist state with Inspector Raj, a tightly controlled economy, painfully slow rate of growth, and education policy after the 60s actually was in the hands of the Marxists. Economic liberalization happened in the early 90s and India joined the global capitalist economy. We saw a steep rise in GDP in the early 2000s, growing urbanization and much vikas. However, much of India continued to remain poor. And this part of India had earlier coped with poverty by holding on to traditional values and social cohesion from centuries. But in the liberalized era, with growing urbanization, the increasing influence of mass media that titillates the aspirations of the poorer sections of society, and the unhinged social engineering projects by political parties that exploit caste-based fault lines, India is not the Bharat of the 20th century. Here, legal equality is already perverted, as in the case of the Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribes Act, and the entire polity is already socialist. The preamble of the Constitution makes no bones about India being a socialist republic. Wealth distribution is the next logical step in this trajectory. And the only thing, perhaps, holding back the political class from openly embracing communism is their own business interests and pressure from transnational corporations. Ajay warned about the communist takeover of India in his tweet thread. In my opinion, India may not embrace communism, but the Indian state will certainly become totalitarian. In fact, I believe it is already a totalitarian state. And mind you, not because Modi is a fascist as liberals cry day in and day out. How India is a totalitarian state, as well as what I think is the way out of this crisis, I will try to cover in the next episode of Pinpoint. And since our art and animation team at Upward was down with COVID and is still recovering, we will do Pinpoint videos perhaps more frequently. Until next time, hopefully next week.